It's not about what you're doing, it's why you're doing it. But what part of you is setting the goal? And what's the purpose? I remember I used to say, I want to earn $1 million a year. And then a good friend asked me one day, he said, how much is your dream lifestyle? I said, oh, about 250 a year. He says, then why do you need to make 1 million? And I remember when that hit me, I asked one of my clients who came to me, who was worth about 30 million at the time. And he asked me, he says, can you help me get to 100 million? I said, absolutely. Because it's just shifting who you're being. I said, but my question is why? Why do you want to earn $100 million? He couldn't answer. I said, so you can walk into a room and other people say that guy's worth $100 million. That's ego. And while you're out here trying to matter to the world, you have two young boys at home wondering if they matter to you.
Have you ever made a mistake that completely changed your life? My guest today is an amazing human being who knows what it means to make a mistake. We all make mistakes, and I've heard the average person makes somewhere between 18 to 20 mistakes per day. And some days I feel like an overachiever who simply and easily blows past those numbers. In this episode, Elijah and I talk about the mistake that landed him in prison, how he dealt with it, and what he did to change his life after prison. Let me tell you a little bit more about him. Elijah has faced significant challenges, including homelessness and job loss. He has transformed his life to become a successful entrepreneur, author, international speaker, and mentor. He is also actively involved in helping people who are in prison and regularly visits prisons to share his wisdom and advice. As you listen to this episode, you may be surprised at what bubbles up for you. Elijah's calm presence will reveal insight about you and your life that you haven't seen or thought or felt before. I know because it happened to me. My guest today is Elijah Kai. He is an amazing speaker. Elijah has a background that most of us could have never imagined. So Elijah, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You have a background that is unique from most people. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version as much as possible, but by the time I was 20 years old, I had attended 14 schools before I graduated high school. My mom got addicted to crack 6 months after I was born. So for the first 8 years, I bounced around from crack house to crack house, homeless shelter to homeless shelter, just chasing my mom. And there were times where she would take me into a house and say, I'll be right back, and go into the bathroom and go out the window and be gone for a couple of days while she was binging out. There were times where she would be stealing in the store and the security would come running after her and she would just let go and take off. But she made sure I knew my grandmother's phone number so that I knew to get picked up. There were times where SWAT team would bust in our doors looking for my mom. I was molested during that time. I was held for ransom by a drug dealer she owed money to. And then when I was 8, I met my father. He just showed up out of the clear blue sky. I had no idea who this man was. And he said that my mother didn't want me anymore. I needed to come live with him. And so that started a hatred for my mother that lasted about 20 years. And my father and I did not get along at all. It was a very contentious, abusive relationship. We kept moving around, kept bouncing around. He was very mean and had a heavy hand. And when I was 14, I threatened to kill him. I told my cousin that I would cut his throat while he was asleep. I had it completely premeditated. I knew I would eventually get out because I was a minor when it happened, and I would claim all sorts of abuse. And then he sent me back to live with my grandmother. That was for my last 2 years of high school. I went back to live in California with my grandmother, and then that was right around when 9/11 happened. And I decided to go into the military because I figured that'd be a great way to escape and get away from everybody that was causing me pain. And once I got out on my own, that I would be able to create a different life. But unfortunately, all the trauma followed me. And I married the first girl who said she loved me at 18 years old. And then I physically, mentally, emotionally abused her until she got the courage to leave. And so with that, I took a loaded gun, put it in my mouth, pulled the trigger, and the only thing that saved me was it misfired. It was at that
Yeah.
point I realized I didn't want to die. I just didn't know how to live. And so I just started drinking until I couldn't see straight. And that's how I ended up in court at 19 or 20 years old, being handed down a sentence of 10 years probation. And that's when I met this guy named Hank.
What were you sentenced for? You had been drinking a lot,
Yeah.
but what was the crime that you were being sentenced for?
Unknowingly having sex with a minor. So I was 18 years old at a party, at a military party that a friend of mine was throwing, and had sex with the wrong girl. And just in the middle of the night one night. And 3 days later, I got picked up for rape. And we proved that wasn't true. The girl ended up admitting that she lied. But then the state didn't want to drop it because, I'm just going to be honest, I was in the Commonwealth of Virginia and I was black and she was white.
Mm,
And so my
wow.
lawyer at the time was a former district attorney for that county. And he negotiated for it to get what's called a withhold finding, meaning if I didn't get in any trouble after that for 5 years, then it would be expunged from my record because I had 32 character witnesses, including undercover operations for the base, different ranking individuals coming to testify on my behalf. And it was just a whole shit show. But the judge threw out the deal and decided to sentence me instead.
So you got 15 years for having sex with somebody that you didn't know was a minor.
And I got 5 years in prison, suspended on 10 years of good behavior. So I ended up going to probation. But yes, it was because I unknowingly had sex with a minor, which is in the state of Virginia is a felony. My
So
lawyer said that if we took it to trial, there's a possibility we could win, but considering I was black in a white Republican controlled environment in the South, the likelihood that I would get a fair trial would be. So the military actually told me to take the deal.
wow. So when you were in the military, were you drinking?
Oh, yeah. All the trauma followed me from when I was younger. And once I got a hold of alcohol, then that was it. I
So
would drink.
basically to try and suppress the memories and the past and the pain.
Absolutely.
Wow. What branch were you in?
Air Force.
Air Force. What did you do for the Air Force?
2W1X1. What is it called? Load toad.
What does that mean?
We loaded bombs on jets.
Okay. Yeah. Guys in the Navy, they probably wear the purple shirts
Yeah,
on
they
an
call it
aircraft.
AO in the Navy. Yeah.
All right. So what happened? You get done with the sentencing thing, and this is the thing that changed your life.
Yeah. So as I'm walking out the courtroom, there's this guy named Hank. I had no idea who this man was. He just was there and he blocks my path on the way out the courtroom. And he was a big black guy. And he says, "Young man, you don't know me, but we have a mutual friend," which was my first sergeant at the time. And he says, "Let me give you a ride home." So he gives me a ride home back to base because this all happened outside of base. And on the way home, he says something to the likes of, "I know the way you think your life is about to go." See, I went to the military to get away from that kind of life because I grew up around people in and out of prison, drug addicts, everything else. But I couldn't escape my programming. Now I know in hindsight that all of that stuff was still in me. And he said, if you're just willing to change what you believe about yourself and how you see yourself, everything will change. Now, I had no idea what he meant. I'm like 20, barely turning 20. I just got my entire life changed. And by the way, I was in line to be a cop at the time.
Really?
My dream was to become a cop and then an FBI agent.
That's amazing. I always wanted to be a cop, a firefighter, or a paramedic. And I have a
Yeah.
bachelor's degree in law enforcement. I've been a firefighter, but my biggest thing was a paramedic
That was my dream at the time. So that dream had just got shattered.
because you got a felony.
Yeah. And so I had no idea what he meant. And like I said, my whole life just got shattered. I contemplated committing suicide again. He said that he would show me a different way. And for the next year and a half, he stuffed personal development down my throat. everything from Tony Robbins to Jim Rohn to Brian Tracy, all this stuff that I never ever heard of before. We were told as kids that all that stuff was for weirdos and white people. So there was nothing wrong with us. So he stuffs personal development down my throat for about a good year and a half. And that just started a obsession with the inner work, getting to know myself, because he took me to these conferences and there was these people telling these rags to riches stories. And by the way, I have to allude to this. I had the greatest probation officer ever. That probation officer felt my entire case was full of shit. And so he decided to not put any restrictions on me. He allowed me to leave the state whenever it was necessary to go to these conferences. He barely ever asked me to check in. He just called me on the phone. Are you okay? Yes. And then after 2 years, he wrote a letter to the judge to get me off probation. And so a 10-year probation sentence turned into 2.
That's outstanding.
And I couldn't have been more grateful. But during that time period, he allowed me to travel as much as I needed to better my life and find a different route, because I was getting out of the military because I lost my security clearance. But I still didn't get a dishonorable discharge because the military was very sympathetic to the situation. They just thought it was bullshit.
What did you start thinking when you start listening to people like Tony Robbins, Jim Rohn, Brian Tracy, all of these things? What was going through your mind the first time you heard it?
It was hope that I could do something different. I could still be something. I could still create a life that would be something amazing. And when it was all about just my mindset, because that's everything started just with mindset. When I was like 20 years old when it all happened, everything started just with about mindset, changing your belief system. And I got really intrigued with that, but I also got really irritated because people kept talking about change your beliefs, but no one would ever talk about how to do it. Right. And I didn't have the money to go to these expensive conferences and everything else. So I just became really obsessed with understanding the human belief system so that I could understand me and why I was the way I was and why I acted the way I acted and why I was so angry and had such temperamental issues and all the things that affected me from my past. So when I first started hearing these things, it was hope that I could live a different life.
So you're getting a high on hopium, but there's no methodology for you to do it. So that somebody turned on the lights of your attic, you see the things that need to be cleared out of your way, but they don't give you a broom or a dustpan or a shovel to start clearing these things out of your way. And so you're looking for the path forward, but not knowing how to get there.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Life is always moving and life doesn't miss, but you can only miss what life is doing on your behalf. Because although I did not have the answers, the people necessary who had the answers and the resources continued to show up without any of my involvement in making them show up. And what I mean by that is one of my great friends, Steve Harrison, he says, when you have a mother's commitment to something, people play with the word commitment. But imagine being as committed to anything as a mother is to feeding her child. And when you have that level of commitment towards anything, you become a black hole for everything necessary for that outcome to occur. And I had one commitment: to become the best version of myself. And at the time, I'm not going to lie, it was about revenge. I'm not this person that they tried to paint me to be. And I'm not going to go down the route that they think I'm going to go down. And so I am going to become so successful Because I remember hearing at one conference, they said, success is the best revenge. I said, I'm going to serve it on a cold plate. And so I had committed to spending the rest of my life to become as successful as I could possibly be. And I was willing to face any part of myself necessary and rip anything out of me that would prevent that from happening. And so I was committed on a whole nother level. And because of that, life kept moving and life kept bringing everything I needed, the people, the resources, the opportunities, just into my awareness. And when I look back at it, I have nothing but gratitude. And it's the reason why now I live my life in full trust and surrender. You ask me, what are you doing? How's your business? I don't have any plans. I stopped making plans because I recognize that it's already happening anyway.
So you're letting the universe or serendipity or whatever, God, whatever you believe in, that's going to be your guide to getting you to the next place that you need
It's
to be.
how I see people watch people like Mark Zuckerberg or all these individuals get on stage and talk about how they did it. But they never pay attention to what they actually are saying. What they're really saying is, I have no freaking clue how I got here, but I can trace everything backwards. And then out of a sense of service, try to put those things together in phases, or I did this and I did this. And then people try to follow that path and then recognize why, or then get frustrated because that path doesn't work out for them. But that's because those people didn't do it. Mark Zuckerberg, yes, he had the desire to create whatever that comparing thing was. But then everything else that happened, that wasn't his genius. That was opportunities or ideas presenting themselves and him being obedient to those opportunities and then following that path. And that's what any other successful entrepreneur, they will tell you, I got lucky. But what do they truly mean? I couldn't have planned the stuff that happened.
We go as far as we can see with our headlights, but we know what the destination is. So an example is if I'm going from Austin to Chicago and I'm going to drive, I can only see 100 feet, 200 feet in front of me in the car. I can't predict every red light. I can't predict road closures, lane closures, or accidents, but I know where the destination is, and I'm going to start heading that direction. And, some days I'll fight wind and rain, but I just keep going. I think we all want a straight path, right? But there's no straight lines in the universe.
The
And
ego
so
wants a straight path because the ego wants control. And that's the difference between effortless creation and stressful creation, is the release of control. You don't have control, even if you're under the illusion that you do have control. This is why people say terms like man has plans and God laughs at those plans. They laugh at those, but they have no idea how true what they're saying is. But they have no idea that they're just saying, something, they're repeating something. But you don't have control. And the ego hates the idea of not having control.
yeah, absolutely. We want to have some semblance of control. So during all of this, did you learn goal setting?
I did learn goal setting. I learned all that stuff, goal setting and manifesting and everything else. And then wonder why it was such a struggle. Because, for instance, first of all, who's setting the goal? It's not about what you're doing, it's why you're doing it. But what part of you is setting the goal? And what's the purpose? I remember I used to say, I want to earn $1 million a year. And a good friend asked me one day, he said, how much is your dream lifestyle? I said, oh, about 250 a year. He says, then why do you need to make $1 million? And I remember when that hit me, I asked one of my clients who came to me, who was worth about 30 million at the time. And he asked me, he says, can you help me get to 100 million? I said, absolutely. Because it's just shifting who you're being. I said, but my question is why? Why do you want to earn $100 million? He couldn't answer. I said, so you can walk into a room and other people say that guy's worth $100 million. That's ego. And while you're out here trying to matter to the world, you have two young boys at home wondering if they matter to you.
Mm. Wow.
Because you spend all your time outside the home convincing yourself that you're doing it for them, when all they ever wanted from you was time. They don't need $100 million. You do. Because there's the little kid in you who still feels like he needs to prove themselves. And so now you want to go take over the world. And you wonder why, when you get to the top of that mountain, you're still unhappy. And it's worse to be rich and miserable than it is to be broke and miserable. Because when you're broke and miserable, you have something to blame it on. When you're rich and miserable, and you have everything you could ever want, and you still feel like you're unhappy and something's missing, that's when it really gets bad. Because now you have nothing else to blame it on. And everything you've been running from, you have no choice but to face. So my question is, it's not what goal you're setting, but who's setting it and why?
That's excellent. I love that. Where do you think this comes from? Why are people setting these huge goals that to have more money than they ever need, to have more followers or influence than they ever need? Where's this coming from?
Let me give it to you an analogy. Imagine you're playing a video game and you're the player. You're the one who created the game. And you have on a headset so you can speak into the game. One day you're playing the game, and then all of a sudden a glitch happens. And the character in the game is no longer controlled by you. It's somehow got its own autonomy. But it wakes up inside the game and has no idea it's in a game. It's there. And so as it's trying to figure itself out, it's got 5 questions. Who am I? Where am I from? Where am I going? Why am I here? And what can I do? And so it starts trying things. And then it notices its feelings. There's things that it wants to feel, and there's things that it doesn't want to feel. And then it starts creating strategies. Strategies to feel what it wants to feel, and strategies to not feel what it doesn't want to feel. So then it starts convincing itself that it needs to accumulate more to feel what it wants to feel, and to not feel what it doesn't want to feel. And so it creates all kind of success and everything else, and a lot of chaos in the process, because it has no idea the purpose of the game. It just knows what it wants to feel and what it doesn't want to feel. And the entire time, the player outside the game is trying to communicate with the player in the game. Hey, but the more the character in the game succeeds, the less it hears the voice of the player, who's trying to guide it in the right direction, because the player of the game absolutely knows the purpose of the game, because the player is the one that created it. So it's not until everything that the character builds collapses, or the character realizes that it's tired, and no matter how much it builds, it still doesn't seem enough, that it sits down and gets quiet enough to hear the player's voice saying, hey. And then the character goes, who is that? And the player goes, it's me. It's you. The higher you. The one that created the game. What do you want from me? Somehow we got disconnected. And we need to reconnect. It is because we're disconnected, you're chasing things that doesn't seem to fill the hole that you feel within. And you can never get enough of what you didn't need in the first place. So let's reconnect. Does this mean that I won't survive? No, because I can't exist in the game without you. But if we move as one, not only will you get everything you ever wanted and feel everything you ever wanted to feel, without lifting a finger. But everything that happens from here on will feel effortless because I know the purpose of the game and you get to enjoy the ride.
You can never get enough of what you didn't need in the first place.
That's why it's a bottomless hole. That's why they can never make enough money. That's why they could never get a big enough house. That's why the company can never get big enough. It's not for the sake of accomplishment, because there gets to a point where they recognize that none of it mattered in the first place.
Where do most people realize this? At what point? Do they have to hit rock bottom in finances, relationships? Can you give me an example of maybe somebody
Sure.
who's actually had this happen?
Everyone will experience this no later than their deathbed, which is when 99.9% of people experience this. This idea of, wait, I've been chasing the wrong thing, or a massive sense of loss. And that's the purpose of suffering. Physical pain, there's a documentary called Awakening Mind. And there's a gentleman on there where he said something so profound. He said, physical pain is to let you know when your body is no longer in homeostasis, right? If you step on a nail and it's rusty and you didn't feel it, eventually you may die from an infection because you never knew that there was a nail in your foot. And if you didn't feel pain, then you can just swallow battery acid and kill yourself. But psychological pain, psychological suffering is to let you know when you are no longer connected, when your ego is running the show. It's to let you know the suffering is to point you back to yourself. It's to let you know you're out of alignment. So the purpose of people experiencing, or they get to the point of terminal illness, all of a sudden, the illusion collapses. Everything that mattered doesn't matter anymore because they recognize it for what it was. A wife loses a husband to death, or maybe infidelity, whatever it is. They go bankrupt. A partner betrays them. Something that they thought they controlled gets taken away from them. And then that spiral downward is the beginning of their awakening.
Have you met people who have found this out before something catastrophic happened, before their deathbed, before the bankruptcy, before their wife or husband left them?
No.
It's almost like they need that wake-up call.
The character in the game must fail in order to listen.
The character in the game must fail in order to listen.
Must fail.
So let's say that there's somebody out there who is going through this right now. Their spouse just left them. They just went bankrupt. Or maybe they're even sitting there. Maybe they have the gun near them. They're ready to pull the trigger, and hopefully they don't have a misfire. Where do they go? How do they help themselves to recover from this illusion that having money would solve this, or whatever they were chasing, that this empty void that needs to be filled?
This is where they get to get quiet so they can hear that voice. Every single person has that voice inside of them, yelling and screaming. We all hear it. You hear it all the time. It's not the voice of thought or reason. It's that command. See, think about it, Mac. There's the voice that you hear in your head that questions everything. What if this? What if that? What if this? How about this? And the one that narrates, oh, look at that car. That's one voice. But then there's the other voice. This one doesn't come with a question mark on the end. This voice comes with a period. And it's usually in short sentences. And it sounds like a command. Don't do that. Let it go. She's not the one. We all hear that voice. but we ignore it because it's faint and it's subtle, but it's constant. And we ignore it because the ego resists that voice, because that voice is the voice of surrender. But the ego needs control. I got it. I'll figure it out. I'll do it. That's why one of my favorite passages in scripture, and I'm not religious, but one of my favorite passages is the story of Job. And at the very end, when Job is having a conversation with God, God doesn't answer Job's question because Job wants an explanation. And God just says, did you put the belt on Orion? Did you fill the seas? Did you build the galaxies? Then don't question. The ego hates that because it needs control. This is also why Jesus said, he does not accept this child, doesn't accept me. And until you become like this little child again, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Meaning, translation, until you go back to full trust and surrender, until you give up control, not to a higher entity, to the real you, you'll never find that peace that you're looking for. Never. All the things that you're building, all the money, all the accolades, all of it will last for 5 minutes. Because it's not until all those things get torn away. This is why the parable of the rich ruler who came to Jesus and said, how do I enter the kingdom? Jesus said, sell everything you have. And poverty pimping pastors have taken that message and made people feel like it's holy to be poor. But that wasn't about money. He needed that man to recognize he was everything with nothing because his entire self-image and all of his worth was wrapped up in everything he had. And Jesus wanted him to realize he was more than he could possibly imagine with nothing in his hand.
So it's not the money, it's not the big house, it's not the flashy cars, it's not the followers. Those things are all vapor, right? They're all just mist. So we are more than inside us than we could ever realize. And most people take their locus of control and put it outside them when it needs to be inside them. Is that correct?
It's already inside them.
It's already. But I think some people take it outside of them and give it to other people. Am I man enough? Am I pretty enough? Am I rich enough? Am I don't know, valuable enough?
Yeah, there's a parable I wrote the other day and I posted on social media about the parable of the bodyguard. And imagine a woman, she hires a bodyguard, not because she's rich, not because she's famous, but because life came at her in a way that she felt like she couldn't handle. So she hires a bodyguard to protect her. And so the bodyguard starts speaking up for her. The bodyguard starts protecting her. The bodyguard starts blocking her from shots. The bodyguard, when it sees that she's down, lifts her head up and says, be a queen. But after a while, the woman forgets that she's not the bodyguard because the bodyguard is completely taken over. She's no longer advocating for herself. The bodyguard is doing everything. And she realized she's no longer living, but she's in a prison because the bodyguard is restricting everything she does to protect her from not getting hurt. When you are a child, you hired a bodyguard called the ego. See, look at the children, toddlers, before 4 years old. They're just pure being. They just are. They're in full trust and surrender. No worries. They don't need therapy. They don't need coaching. They don't need to accomplish anything. They have joy just because they have joy. They have peace just because they have peace. It's amazing to me how much of the personal development industry is trying to teach you something you already are, you just forgot. Because when self-awareness kicks in for that infant or that toddler, then all of a sudden, the character wakes up inside the game. And now the joy isn't there just for being there because they felt something other than joy and they're aware of it. And so now it becomes, how do I not feel this anymore? And the ego steps in and goes, hey, I know how to not feel this no more. And the scared child goes, okay, help me. And then that's when that little voice starts. And all of a sudden, life becomes transactional. How to get what I want and how to avoid what I don't want. The only challenge is that begins what Wayne Dyer calls edging God out, the ego, because the more that little voice starts to talk and you believe that little voice, the further and further away you get from trust and surrender until the point where, yeah, you're 40, 50 years old, rich, sitting inside of a mansion that you wish you could just give up, but you can't. And you don't know why. But that's because that little voice has made it damn near impossible to feel what you want to feel and very easy to feel what you don't want to feel. Case in point, I had a client. He came to me and he said, how do I find happiness? I said, you are happiness. And I said, you just have a bunch of definitions that don't matter. He says, what do you mean? I says, tell me what your definition of accomplishment is. And he says, to be accomplished, I have to be the CEO of my company, make a certain amount of money, live in a certain, and he just starts naming this Mount Everest laundry list of shit that needed to occur for him to feel accomplished. And I said, what is the number one emotion you don't want to feel? What's the one you run from? Wow. And he says, feeling insignificant. And I said, what has to occur in order for you to feel insignificant? And he says, to be wrong. You've made it damn near impossible to feel what you want to feel, but all you have to do is be wrong about something to feel insignificant. And you wonder why you keep building, trying to outrun this feeling of being significant. And every time you hit a new goal, you move the goalpost because that feeling of insignificance is still there and you don't know why.
That's so insightful. I love that question of what needs to happen for you to feel this way or that way. It's like the rules that we have for our lives, right? And some of those are really dangerous. The average person is wrong about 18 to 20 times a day. And some days I feel like an overachiever. If I were that guy and I felt like I had to be right all the time, that's a terrible way to live. And to me, that's a recipe for misery. Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is why I asked a friend of mine, I said, hey, I wrote this new book for the rich and miserable. If you know any, let me know. And this guy manages a lot of money. He says, I could find a shorter list of rich and happy.
Wow.
Because it's not what they did, it's why they did it. It's totally okay to be a billionaire. Be a billionaire. Why not? But what you have to question is the motive, not the goal.
So let's talk about your book that just came out. Already Whole, Unlock the 8 Keys to Emotional Freedom and Inner Peace. So does this book unpack everything that you're talking here and provide a recipe for somebody who may be chasing the wrong thing?
Oh, absolutely. But this
Can
book
you give me
a warning?
Okay.
Because this is not a book you read. This is a book that reads you. Most people can't get through the first couple chapters without putting it down and having to come back to it. If their ego isn't ready to be confronted, then they definitely should not read this book. This book is for those who are at that point where something's got to change and they're looking for answers. This book is a mirror for them.
So would this book be best given to somebody who's already broken, who's already had the fatal flaw? They've already hit bankruptcy or divorce or whatever it is. At what point should somebody read this book?
When they start having questions, is this all there is?
People are on a journey, right? We all think that the money's going to solve it, the flashy car, the nice house, whatever it is, the followers. Can you give me an example of somebody who was chasing that, read your book or followed your advice, and now they're living in a different way and they are much happier?
Oh, yeah. The $100 million guy that I was talking about earlier in the show.
Okay.
When I asked him that question, it shut him down because he couldn't answer it. And then he came and spent 3 days with me. And this book is really about what happens when you come spend 3 days with me. Because everything that's in this book happens in those 3 days. And when we finished that 3 days, he went back home. And people think that now he's going to expand to the $100 million guy. Actually, everything began to collapse.
In a good way, though, because I'm guessing you're using the word collapse, and we think of that as a building collapse or something catastrophic. But I'm guessing that this is a different story.
Everything that his ego built, once he decided he no longer wanted to be that, started to collapse all on its own. Opportunities started drying up. Clients started leaving his company. And I watched him freak out for a little while. And I said, this is great. See, it goes back to what Jesus said, that the temple must fall. It's not about an outside temple. It's everything that the ego built. Not one brick will remain. See, this is why he called it the narrow path. The peace is the narrow path, because you have to be willing to give up everything. The temple must fall. Not one stone will remain, meaning everything the ego built will burn away. And this is why most people will never, ever reach that level of peace. Because the ego is crafty and it negotiates. It says, what about this one? What about that one? Anything it can do to remain in control. But everything started falling away. And I tell my clients all the time, the moment you decide that you want to let go of this illusion, leave the matrix, the moment you decide to take the red pill to see what's actually there, all hell's going to break loose. And as you watch things fall away, let it. And the panic you feel inside, that's the ego freaking out. Let it. Because when it burns all the way down, you're going to find a level of peace you never knew existed. And you didn't have to move off your couch to get it. And so that guy, and I said, everything's going to work out. Well, that guy ended up selling part of his company and made $1 million off of it. Enough money to pay off his house and everything else, all his other debt. And then him and his wife realized that they weren't a good match and that their egos were keeping them together. And so they split. Not in a messy way, but this entire relationship was built superficial. And then he moved into his own apartment, bought himself a camper, and now is the happiest he's ever been, needing nothing, fully present for his boys. And so some entrepreneurs may hear that, be like, you destroyed that guy's life. There's a reason why Jesus said, he who loses their life will find it. But the ego does not like that sentence.
Nope. This is incredible. I think most of our listeners are on this path to more. Dopamine is the molecule of more, and our ego wants more. And so what you're saying is that might not be the path that we should be taking. So this is going to be eye-opening for a lot of our listeners. Elijah, is there anything as we get ready to wrap up, is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have?
You asked me everything you were supposed to ask me. But I do want to say to the viewer, if you're pissed off right now, don't blame Matt. That's me. Listen, if you're resisting everything that you just heard, perfect. If you're not resisting everything you just heard, perfect. There was no right way or wrong way to listen to this podcast. So if you listen to this episode all the way through, this is what you were supposed to hear. And for those that cut it off, they only heard what they were supposed to hear for where they are right now. And that's completely okay.
Well, that's well said. I heard something yesterday, and it was this idea that sometimes we get what we need to hear, not what we want to hear. And I think if somebody's listened this far and they came here expecting one thing, but they got this thing, but it was what they needed to hear, then they're in the exact right place. And so once again, we have helped somebody else with our gifts and our time and our treasure and our talent. What an amazing journey.
I'm grateful to be here and just be the vessel.
So, how do you prevent this kind of push pull that we want something to happen or we think something's going to happen, but how do we just sit back and relax and not do anything?
That's where the work is. The detachment from everything. It's releasing all the attachments to why you need things to happen. Again, it's the motive. Why do you need it to happen? I need to build a podcast with 1 million followers. Why? If you didn't build a podcast with 1 million followers, would you still do it? No. Then why do you need it to happen? It's the attachment to it that you're after. So the podcast or the 1 million followers, that's just a means to an end. What's the end that you're after that you don't think you already have? I'll feel successful. What if you didn't need to build a podcast to feel successful? What if you could just feel successful because you woke up with a smile on your face? What if you could feel successful because you gave your daughter attention today? What is your definition of success? Or better question, whose definition of success are you after? See, in American culture, and I love Joe Polish for pointing this out, Edward Bernays built the world that we have today. He built the American culture we have today. The whole purpose of marketing, and if you want to know what I'm talking about, it's a very dry documentary, but it's called Century of the Self. It's on YouTube, and it was done by BBC. It's extremely dry, but extremely insightful as to why our consumerist culture is what it is. But let's really talk about what marketing is. To convince you that what you already have is not enough, so I can sell you something else.
Wow. So true. So true.
Oh, you got running shoes? Not as good as these. Those shoes you have? Trash. These shoes, much better. You should buy these.
This software that you're using for your company, I've got some that's faster, better, easier. You don't have to work as hard.
Maybe it does. I'm not saying marketing is evil, not at all. But let's be clear. The goal is to create thirst where there wasn't thirst. A woman is fine with her body until she sees a magazine that says this is what beauty is. And then the ego goes, I want that.
So back to the question that's rattling around in my brain. When you said that the question was, how do you not fight what's supposed to be coming for you? So I look at it like I'm sitting in a self-driving car, maybe a Tesla that can maintain the lane, right? And I keep trying to grab the wheel. Is that kind of what this is like? Is that
Absolutely. Life is already moving.
So you just really, truly just need to kind of sit back and let whatever's coming to you come and stop trying to force everything.
Isn't that what every spiritual tradition, when you break it all the way down, isn't that what the Buddha talked about? Isn't that what Jesus talked about? Isn't that what the Tao Te Ching is about? That's what it's all about. Trust and surrender. Love, trust, surrender. Or most entrepreneurs don't like, most egos don't like the idea of the word surrender. So let's call it yield. Yield to what's already occurring.
So
But
just
it's not
sit back.
taking me in, but it's not taking me in a direction I want to go. Who is the I that's talking?
Ego. Yeah.
Yes. It's not going in the direction that the character, let's go back to the character in the game. When the big I, the infinite, takes over the game again, the character is now yielding to the player. That doesn't mean that the character doesn't have commentary.
It's another way to look at this is the marionette. If you're the puppet, we've cut the strings, and then Pinocchio, if we cut the strings, the guy, the controller can't control him. And so he thinks that he needs to come alive and do his own thing. And so that's a very different analogy, but
No, let's play with it. Because people say, are you saying I'm a puppet for the universe? True answer, yes.
ah,
Yes. You are the vessel. You are the universe in human form, which is why you are fully human and fully divine. You are the universe.
yeah.
You are not a drop of the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. The wave is still part of the ocean. People say God is omnipresent, but then they stop it right here. So omnipresent, but you? God is everything but you? How does that make sense to you? And I tell people, describe your body to me. Describe. And then they want to describe just this physical form. I said, okay. If trees did not exist, could you exist? Could this physical form exist without trees? Could this physical form exist without bees that then pollinate? Trees that produce oxygen? No? If the sun was any closer, would this human form exist? If it was
No.
any further away, would this human form exist?
Nope.
If the ocean wasn't where it is, could this human form? No. So try to explain to me who you are without explaining the entire universe.
You can't. It's all interrelated.
That's oneness. That's the essence of who you are.
Elijah, if somebody wants to get a hold of you or connect with you or hire you or reach out to you, what's the best way to find you?
Elijah@belieftheory.com. Just email me.
Elijah@belieftheory.com.
Or they can find me on Facebook as Elijah Kai or Instagram as awakening_ with Elijah. And on LinkedIn, just know that if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, then it might be a while before you get a reply because I'm barely on LinkedIn. But Elijah@belieftheory.com goes directly to me.
Okay. And will you spell your last name?
Kai.
Elijah Kai. All right. Thank you so much for this incredible journey. It does even make me question, am I going down the right path? Am I doing the right things? And I think that's the whole point of this. So well done.
Grateful to be here, brother. Thank you for having me.
All right. Until next time, thank you, Elijah. Hey, real quick, we're building a community of entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs. These are people just like you who want to start or grow their businesses and are ready to take the next step. If that sounds like something you want to be a part of, sign up and join us today.